Hello, Raghav. Super happy to have you on the Close Call show today. How have you been?
Excellent. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited. This I've been looking forward to this since you sort of reached out, and this sounds like an exciting time.
So let's kick this off. I want to start with a bit of an introduction. So tell the listeners who you are, what you do, and what is FireUp.
Absolutely. Well, I'm Raghav. I come from India, and I graduated from the MBA, I think 2019. So while I was at the MBA, I was sort of looking for ideas. I was almost sure I don't want to I don't want to work in a job. I was pretty sure about that. And I didn't apply to any job except one. I thought I'll just apply for McKinsey sneakily and see whether I'll actually get through. I did not. That's a secret. But anyways, I was like, hey, you know what? Let's delve in. So I was also chairing the entrepreneurship club at the business school. I was on the board of a couple of entrepreneurship centers and stuff like that. And we went through a couple of ideas. I think we started a company that did cloud kitchens in Malaysia. Then we worked on something in manufacturing in India. And then I finally came across this very interesting piece of cookware. Now, when you graduate from universities such as Oxford, Harvard, you're simply expected to go into AI or finance or investment banking or venture capital, right? And it's interesting that after 2 years, 3 years, I would speak with people and they're like, wait, what are you into? I said, cookware. Like, are you sure it's cookware? Like pots and pans? I'm like, yeah. So it's sort of an exciting uh, journey to take post the MBA. So at the MBA, I met this professor, Professor Thomas Povey, he's super smart. He's a rocket scientist. He tests engines for Boeing's and Airbus before they actually take off. He's also sort of the Rolls-Royce fellow at Oxford. And he developed this very interesting piece of technology where while he was mountaineering, he discovered that water takes forever to heat up. And he discovered that each time anyone cooks, 60% of that heat is actually lost in the environment. So he developed fins around the heating vessel using principles of thermodynamics tested over 3 to 4 years and was able to come up with this technology where you're able to pull in 40% more heat that is otherwise lost, right? So this results in faster heating. This results in better and more even cooking. And well, the rest is history. We met, we discovered a mutual passion for cookware. And after a year, we registered a company in the UK. Yeah, so that's how it pretty
This
much
is
starts off.
fantastic.
Thank you.
Fantastic, super path breaking. Because absolutely what you said is right. Oh, everyone wants these high flyer, sexy jobs. So IB or PE or VC, tech, whatever. It's interesting that you chose something hardware and something that's super unsexy, and everyone's gonna be like, you did MBA for this. I mean, you could have stayed anywhere and
You
figure
have
this
no idea
out.
how many times I got that reaction.
We need people that are innovating in spaces that no one's thinking about, because we've been using the same pots and pans that our grandmothers and forefathers used. Super interesting. One personal question: weren't you scared? Because it's hardware. You need to find the right people, the supply chain, branding, and investment into making these things and testing them out before you can sort of put them in the market. But weren't you scared?
Absolutely. I mean, I was really scared because, well, I'm getting out of the MBA. There are costs involved with the MBA and the expectations involved, right? Both mine and my family's and things like that. And to jump into something that's very unexplored. I did have a cookware manufacturing background, but what I did now, what I did back in the day, and what I'm doing now is completely different, right? That involved manufacturing and selling it to brands, right, who would label it with their own name and then sort of sell it there. But here we are building a brand. It was a whole different ball game. Something that comes with, yeah, every day is a new twist and turn. I'm waking up in the morning expecting an email to basically flip me throughout the day, right? So that's the kind of business it is. And with hardware businesses, you have to be especially careful. Like aligning and creating the supply chain all across the world is a magnanimous task.
Mhm. So there are a few interesting things that you said there, so we'll sort of get into that. Another personal question, given that you and I went to the same school, I've always felt terrified speaking to any professor at Oxford. Yeah, they're super approachable. Some of them even crack jokes, which is a rarity. But how did you? I mean, there's this being inspired by someone, but then taking it to the next level, teaming up with them, and then starting a company with them. How was your confidence level then? How did you do that?
I think that's a great question because so how this came about is Oxford actually put out six patents for commercialization. They had these six patents that been developed over a few years. They found teams and students to commercialize that patent, right? So we're one of those teams. We sort of won that competition, or yeah, were sort of runners up in that competition. Then you get involved. Then you get introduced to the professor who's actually built cloud, right? So the first time I met my professor, I was like, okay, this guy is extremely smart. There are no two ways about that. But there is that image of Oxford professors being sort of like looking out of the ivy towers, and being very strict and sort of to the point. But I have to say, Tom is an exception. I think he's very business savvy. He's actually launched around 2 to 3 companies of his own. He works on the boards of a few $100 million companies. What he understands is the customer, what he understands is the market. And I think that's a rarity in terms of co-founder professors.
Absolutely. I think what you said is 100% right, and there's you couldn't have put it better. Now, I know you have a media story, UK's version of Shark Tank. How was that? Tell me a bit about how did you apply, why did you apply, how did you get in? Were you able to leverage that experience? And this question is also if anyone else, any other founder thinking about getting into some of these competitions, what should they do? And post that, how should they leverage that, reach out, that media presence, or the connections that they're getting from these sort of programs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a fantastic experience with a lot of unexpected twists and turns. Firstly, so we did not reach out to BBC, or we did not apply with BBC. They reached out to us. They probably found us, yeah, I guess on some website or portal, or maybe through a Kickstarter. So, well, I mean, backstory is we launched 3 Kickstarters, and that's where we are at the moment. So they reached out to us, and it was a 3 to 4 month process where they did some due diligence. They wanted us to fill some forms. We had a few calls, and well, we finally got selected. It's a bit tricky because even to the last moment, you're not sure whether you're selected. So anyone who's applying to Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, I think, yeah, you just got to stay put. Yeah, don't lose patience because you might not get the most straightforward answers saying, hey, you're in, you're out, right? So till the very last moment, you don't know whether you're in or out. And one fine morning, we get a call that, hey, you know what? You have to take a train to BBC Manchester Studios. And I think that was very exciting because, well, I'd never been on national television with 7 million viewers in front of me, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, well, 5 billionaires and 7 million viewers, right? So it was quite a different experience. In terms of how it went down was pretty simple. They do not give you any prep before that. They simply tell you about the logistical and the operational specifics in terms of where you have to be, what you have to do. We shipped our samples before, right? So the samples reached them before. And then, well, it was my first marriage anniversary that day and the day we were shooting, right? And yeah,
Okay.
it was my wife and I, we took a train to Manchester and we were like, hey, this is what we're doing on our first marriage anniversary. So yeah, we sort of got there. You have to get there a day before, and shooting starts
Hmm.
at 6 a.m. We were the first to shoot. Well, you go through hair, makeup, and you're given an assistant as you get through. It's a very exciting journey because I mean, it's like you see in the movies, right? It's like you see on TV. So they do the pre-interview questions before, and well, yeah, and then they just launch you into all of it. So one thing that I would like to actually specify is I'd never met the dragons before, right? So it was live, just it's all shot live. So I've never seen any of the dragons. The
It's
first
not
time I
scripted.
entered the den,
It is
yeah,
what it
it's
is.
not scripted. Yeah, it is what it is. So the first time I entered the den, that was the first time I met the dragons. You do a 2 to 3 minute pitch, right? And then you delve right into questions. I had an extraordinary hour of questioning. You're in the set, and after some time, you just go a bit numb, right? Because you're just being questioned one after the other. These extremely smart questions, and then you also get very comfortable into what you're doing because the first 2 to 3 minutes are like high octane pitch, and after that, there are questions. Well, I mean, for those of you who are in the UK, you'd probably know the judges. They really like the product. They thought the valuation was a bit high, and well, after 120 minutes, you sort of get out. You do a post interview, and well, after that, yeah, you do not hear back from them for a while. And I think the biggest twist in this entire sort of ordeal was that we did not get aired, right? For reasons unknown, we did not get aired on BBC. And I think they air around 70% of the companies they
Sure.
actually get on, yeah, on set. Yeah, when you've gone to Dragon's Den, I think it takes one off your bucket list, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think this is super nice experience and a an interesting one because it really prepares you for the most challenging and the toughest VCs. The other conversations that you have when you go into fundraising rooms, it just really prepares you for the tough questions, the ones that are straightforward because you've done it all. You've done it in front of a camera. Were you able to then connect with these dragons post that? Is there any sort of leverage that you have? Can you continue that relationship post the show?
I'd like to say that one should do that. We did not do that. I think most of all the five dragons had almost zero experience in sort of cookware or in sort
Mm,
of home appliances or that industry. And looking at the portfolios, they've not invested before. Now, just in terms of the brand, our biggest market is actually the US, right? So we're always looking for a strategic investor that helps us get entry into US retailers, helps us set up marketing operations in the US, right? So in a way, they wouldn't be the best investors for us, but I think we had a lot of co-contestants who were in active touch with the Dragons post the show. I mean, of course, if you dart them an email and sort of say that, hey, you know what, I was there. There is, of course, you get massive leverage in terms of having appeared on the show.
I think you've really touched on something that's super important that everyone should know. So before you chase an investor or you spend time or invest time in forging a relationship, you should always think about, are these the right investors for me and my
Absolutely. Yeah.
business and the geography that I want to target? So absolutely, absolutely makes sense. Okay. Now you also mentioned while starting a hardware business, it's critical that you sort of figure out the entire supply chain and the value chain. How did you go about that? And what are your tips for anyone that wants to start proper R&D, patent-driven hardware business?
This that was still the toughest part of the puzzle, and it's still the toughest part of the puzzle, and I
Mm-hmm.
expect it to be the
Mm-hmm.
toughest part of the puzzle, right? I come from a background where I owned a factory before, so we sort of manufactured for other brands. But
Mm-hmm.
when you flip roles, right, when you are the buyer and not the seller, everything changes, right? So
Mm.
for me, when we started this business, I visited over 20 foundries across America, Asia, and Europe.
Mm.
So I think the first point would be you physically go to all of these foundries and you figure out whether they can do what you're asking them to do. Now, a lesson that was learned the hard way, but I would really encourage everyone to sort of look at this very crucial aspect. We worked with a couple of factories in Europe before we fixated on the current factory. They were all too small, right? They were too small.
Mm.
They had, let's say they're doing $5 million in turnover, $10 million in turnover. They're much bigger than us or the company or the startup, but in the bigger scheme of manufacturing, they're quite small. Now, what happens in that is after a few years, they only had 2 to 3 customers, right? One or two of those customers pulled out, they stopped having that kind of demand. So the situation was there was a time that they were completely dependent on us to provide all of their
Mm.
revenues, right? So as a startup, it's difficult to persuade a very big contract manufacturer to actually manufacture for you. But I would suggest that you push hard and get to a big contract manufacturer rather than working with a very small contract manufacturer. We've had to change our factories thrice. And apart from the cost, building relationships, building trust with factory owners across Europe in countries and cities you've never heard of is is grueling. And so, in terms of, I'll just quote a very quick story that actually happened with us. Our first factory that we worked with, they had 3 buyers, two of them pulled out. We were the only one left. We had limited revenue. We were in the second year, right? And we directed all of our cash flow to them because we needed to help them survive a bit, right? But at one point, we were like, hey, you know what? We're a small company. We can't sustain you, right?
You can't bankroll them.
Yeah, we can't bankroll them, right? We're trying to survive ourselves.
Yeah.
So what really happened is the next day they go bankrupt, and uh, it was a scene out of the movies. I'm sitting two oceans across. I think I was traveling somewhere, and the landlord of that factory had given the factory owner uh, only 2 days to empty all the goods. Right? We had around 6 pallets of our goods that we had poured all our cash in at the moment. Right? Well, I was speaking to a truck driver in the language I did not know, and he had two employees. We were on video call. I think I was in the US or something. I was on video call, and that person was picking up pallets. The landlord was not letting him pick up the pallets. And I'm talking a cool 50,000 euros. And in the first year, that's a lot of money, right? So basically, we basically rescued all of the inventory. We still lost some money in that turnaround, and we finally rescued all of that inventory and got it to the next factory. So I think you have to be prepared for anything. So that's something very important.
This is what a story, because I've heard about, I mean, I've seen customer concentration from but this is on the other side. What happens when you have only one seller? Oh, it's super interesting, and I think it's a valuable lesson for anyone who's thinking about setting up relationships. Another question is, when you went through these 20 foundries across different geographies, are there specific differences or insights that you gather? Okay, manufacturing Asia is like this, or US is technically advanced, labor costs. So when you made the decision to manufacture then in Europe, what were the levers, such as, for me, cost, advanced technology, then shipping? These are the three things, these are the three variables that are important. So what were your decision making parameters?
Absolutely. So we make a very unique product, right? We expect our
Mm.
product to last our customers' lifetime, right? So the idea was I also come from a manufacturing background. So basically, there were no cutting corners. I needed to ensure that we are delivering the highest quality product that there ever is, right? So that was number one. And how do we ensure that? People who have that kind of experience, right? People who have that kind of machinery. And I think one of the what I thought did not matter but did matter is for very high priced products, people prefer a made in Europe product over a made in Asia product. Now, it's sort of a controversial thing to say, and I may not be right, but I think the product that we are talking about, cast iron cookware, especially enamel cast iron cookware, there was expertise that existed in remote corners of Europe that we sought out, and I think that's how we made the decision. I wouldn't focus too much on uh, proximity to selling centers. The biggest market, 70% of our market is the US. Ideally, we should have a factory in the US. Uh, Basically, there was no enameling in the US. I visited multiple plants of all across. There was seasoning on cast iron, but there was no enameling on cast iron. Right? So we basically had to go all over to Europe and sort of get that done. There's a lot of factories doing enameling on cast iron in Asia, but they did not sort of cut what we required there.
Interesting. I've also heard this a lot when there's a certain image that a brand needs to sort of portray to the audience, where manufactured in China or manufactured in Asia is not considered premium. But I also know, because I speak to a lot of fashion technology startups, that there's so much more advanced machinery in China or in other parts of Asia that Europe still doesn't have. And because they have massive factories, the operation costs are much lower, even though the logistics is much farther away. The technology and then the manufacturing costs could be much more simpler or cheaper in China. But, a brand needs to do what it needs to do to sell. I actually want to shift gears and sort of move into D2C questions and understanding the D2C market, the branding, the positioning, and all of that. Okay, so there's this technically sound patented idea. Now, how do you create a brand around that, especially in a category which is like, you go to Amazon, you want a pan, the thousand sellers selling thousand different pans, or there are these established brands like Staub or Le Creuset, which have been there forever and ever. So now, as a new entrant in a market that is seemingly crowded, how do you create a brand?
I mean, That's a great question, especially when we differentiate between D2C and B2B, right? So for us, pursuing both D2C and B2B was a survival necessity, but I would highly recommend pursuing both D2C and B2B to start with, right? You never know what works better for you. I mean, we're in a market where D2C brands are not doing well. I mean, you look at Allbirds Uni and a couple of other brands. So if you look at the stock markets and their quarterly earnings, they're not doing pretty well. But I think most of the brands that started D2C have to pursue or have pursued B2B growth at any cost at some point of their life, right? Because it's just not enough to drive growth, the kind of growth that you're looking for year on year. The second thing is building a brand is so much of who you are, who the founder is, who the story is, rather than just the product, right? You can have the best product, the most quality product. But if there's not a real story where there are passionate people driving that story, I don't think the brand resonates with the customer. In our case, it was very exciting because in what universe would you have someone who went for an MBA with a cookware manufacturing background meet someone who designs rocket engines for Airbus and Boeing, make a cookware product, right? So I think that how all of that came together is beautiful. And I think none of it was supposed to come together. We just sort of found what we are looking for. And in terms of, if you look at the existing competition in the market and legacy brands, and the very intense the very for basically everyday cookware, it was so important to differentiate. If today I did not have a patented product that gave actual benefits to the home chef or the professional chef, I would find it much harder to gain any sort of traction whatsoever. So I think product differentiation, genuine story, and sort of pursuing both B2B, D2C channels in the beginning as a way to experiment. I think just try what works for you. You may never know you have something that you've not tried but works for you, right? So I think these 3 points are super important to build out a brand.
Very interesting. We also touched upon luxury and quality product. So, which means there's a certain price level and certain positioning that your product has. How did that decision come about? How did you then categorize, okay, I'm gonna sell it in affordable luxury, or it's not gonna be a 30 pound metal or iron skillet that's on Amazon. It's gonna, because of the value that the product itself brings. How did you go about that decisioning?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. There's this very interesting interview recently of the chairman of Hermes. He talks about our product is not expensive, it's costly, right? So in terms of FireUp, our product is costly because the cost of manufacturing that product is high. We do not cut any corners, right? Our factories are certified. We ensure that we reject as much as possible in terms of recycling something that won't work, right? So our cost of manufacturing is significantly higher, and we will not cut corners on a quality of the product just to give you a better price. So I think that's what we think as a brand. Now, in terms of positioning in the market, essentially we were right below the legacy brands uh, because people are sort of skeptical. Like, if you're paying X amount, right? Why not go for a legacy brand? But then they see something very exciting, something that's never been done before, and something that promises you the same quality, but it is 10% less price than the legacy brand. So I think that sort of really that's an easy way for the customer to actually pick the product. So I think that was the thinking behind it.
I think that's brilliant because I think that the psychology is right. If I'm going to spend so much, then I'll get this brand that everyone knows about that I can show
Yeah.
off. But then here is a product that gives you slightly more efficiency, or even more efficiency gains. Great product, great value, but for a slightly discounted price, and that I think that's a great deal. Super smooth, smart, actually, clever, very clever. So between you and the professor, almost co-founders, did you have any difference of opinion while deciding on this is how I'm going to position the product, this is where I have to keep it, or when it comes to this is the geography where I want to place my manufacturers, or any sort of discussions, decision making? How did that go?
I mean, all the time, all the time. I mean, if someone says it doesn't happen, they're probably lying.
They're
I mean,
lying.
yeah, they're two sets of humans. They'll have different opinions, different strategies, sort of different sort of personal egotistical problems, things like that. But I think we are quite aligned in that way because we only consult each other on executive points of conflict. But otherwise, the operational bit is sort of taken
Mm,
care of. So when Tom and I talk about just like how are we going to expand this company, where are we going next, what are the new products that we are working on, I do think in the beginning I was as a student, right? I wasn't a professor at that time, so there
mhm.
was a sort of hierarchy at that time.
Of
But
course.
then you sort of become equals when you're starting a company, right? So I did not listen to him for a lot of things because I was like, hey, I'm this generation, I understand how things work. But I learned. I think sort of got back, and we really value and respect each other's opinions. And I think it all comes down to that. You're gonna have to, you're gonna have conflicts. You got to set your expectations to have conflicts. But I think respecting each other's opinions, respecting who the person is, I think tops it all.
You need to expect to have conflicts, but just then the perseverance and the mental maturity to be able to get through those conflicts and in a mature way, in a pragmatic way. I think that's what that sets founders apart, founders that stick around apart. Another thing that I want to sort of touch upon is, you said product mix and which product comes next. So how do you then go about that? And is releasing new products every season, every year, is that necessary and important to stay relevant as a new brand?
100%. Um,
Hmm.
as a new brand, so every year we put two trade fairs, one in Chicago, one in Frankfurt. Frankfurt caters to Middle East and Europe, and Chicago caters to the Americas. So as a new brand, if you're not seen in the next trade fair, a lot of retailers and distributors
Hmm.
will think you're dead, right? That's how it works. So it's almost a necessity to be seen at trade fairs. I think this is another bit I would really advise people who are starting such kind of businesses is that the first thing I did, I put a trade fair. Even when I hardly had the product, I put a trade fair, and
Hmm.
you'll be surprised that our biggest buyer discovered us from the smallest booth in our first year. So I would really suggest that you get out in the market and you meet those distributors, retailers who are ultimately the gateway to your customers. So that is super, super important. And sort of in terms of introducing new products, I think we have turned out to be very lucky. I'm not sure whether you know, but we launched our first product on Kickstarter. So we had access to this massive amount of pre-sale funding where we experimented, we built out tooling, we built out packaging, we built out the product. And those same supportive backers backed us for the next product launch and the next product launch. Very recently,
Wow.
we were
Okay.
1000% funded after launching the Brazier. We are launching the physical Brazier in Frankfurt next month. So I think for us, our strategy is pretty much we do a soft launch on Kickstarter and then we take it to the trade fair. So I think
Interesting.
we're very lucky that we have such a massive pool of backers who backed us.
Interesting, interesting. So, trade shows, talk about your product, be present, be seen by the retailers who then take you to the next mile. Interesting tip. Now, when you think about launching new products, when you think about the price point of these products, do you think about, okay, so I've now catered or sold to, let's say, the upper middle class or the two income households. Now I'm going to cater to someone who's a one income household, or different price points, just so that you pander to a wider audience. Is that a consideration, or is it new innovation, new product innovation, new design? So how does that decision go about?
A lot of those decisions are driven by the demand that comes from existing
Mm,
customers. So someone who's bought a Dutch oven reached out for a fry pan, someone who's bought a fry pan reached out to us for braziers, and someone who had braziers reached out to us for saucepans, right? So I think
interesting.
that's how we've sort of expanded our range and looked at customers. You do bring up a very interesting point. I think we're always trying to cater to different price ranges regardless. I wouldn't say that we look at different price ranges for one product, but let's say a Dutch oven retails at 250 pounds. So we would go to a fry pan that retails at 150 pounds, right? So it would essentially give more access and tap a wider market through new products.
I'd completely forgotten that there's something called listen to your customers and customer demand. I think that makes sense. That becomes your primary focus on what do customers actually want? What do they enjoy? What do they want to sort of add to their kitchen? Now, the other topic that I wanted to talk about and ask you is direct to consumers. You didn't stop with one geography. You didn't, I know your customers are all across the globe. Is that a deliberate decision, or did that just come by because there was demand in different geographies and you just opened up to different geographies? How did you decide that?
It wasn't a deliberate decision. I mean, so many of these decisions I try and sort of see what happens. Quite frankly, we all as a company are just learning, right? I mean, I think that's the most scary and exciting part of this business is that very recently we started working with a second warehouse in the US. We had a first warehouse in the UK. So just like trusting global partners, building those relationships is probably the only infrastructure you need, right? So I think the building of that trust infrastructure is very, very exciting. I then think from day one, we were like, we will supply to anyone who needs our product. So it was not limited to any company, any country, any continent, nothing like that. So I think through that process, we learned that the US and Canada were the largest buyers, followed by Australia, Europe, UK, things like that.
You said something very interesting and a new word for me, trust infrastructure. And you've sort of touched on that tone about meeting suppliers, building a relationship with them, and how difficult that was, especially as an outsider. Now, what were the mistakes that you made, and if you were to do this thing all over again, what would you do differently in trust infrastructure?
Absolutely. I think when people talk about their businesses, they talk about the assets, the land, all of that they have. We basically have trust. Quite frankly, at this as a young startup, I know that my factory owner trusts me. I know my customer trusts me. I know the warehouse trusts us and the bank trusts us, right? So I think sort of getting these elements together and building that infrastructure is so important, right? Now, in terms of how we sort of build this, I think I am a big believer in being present. Doesn't matter which remote part of the world that person is. I would basically fly in there and I would take an appointment. Most of them didn't give an appointment the first time we actually got there. Just to give you an example, there was a prominent retailer in London. They did not give us appointments. We were talking over emails and stuff like that. We just went up to their office with our pots. So we've done that multiple times. We've gone across multiple head offices with our pots. And I think, yeah, I cold email every single day. I think I cold call, I cold email every single day. So I think, yeah, you just got to be there. You know, people trust you if you're present. People do not trust you if you're absent. So I think that is so important.
So your tip to anyone that wants to start something is be present. Is there anything that you did wrong and you do differently now that you've been through the motions of reaching out to people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would sort of go into this animated conversation where it was about business points, it was about finance, it was about points that were very to the point, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
think what changed was building these personal relationships was so important. I'll give you a quick example. I mean, it's not only about your suppliers or your buyers. I actually speak regularly to people who buy our products, and we do not have a retail store, right? So it's interesting how much people will actually love your product. People call us back at our office phone number. And I literally speak for hours to people I do not know, but they've bought our product. So I think this is one of the finest things that I've actually gained from the company. I know names of people who bought our products globally. In any given month, I would speak to almost 100 customers because we receive their phone calls, we get their reviews, and I would actually write direct emails. To give an example, I think we were very recently featured in the Telegraph, and uh, I think it had millions and millions of hits. We were sort of number two, right under King Charles for all of Christmas Day on their homepage. So it was, yeah, it was pretty fascinating. We did not expect to be covered by the Telegraph. And when we did, we basically sold out. Our warehouses got empty within the next 24 hours.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And I was like,
great.
okay, this is the best problem in the world to have. I would love to have this problem every day.
Mhm, mhm,
And
mhm,
I personally reached out to 200 people whose orders we couldn't fulfill at that time. And I wrote a personal email to
mhm.
all of them saying that, hey, you know what? This is the situation. And I'm very sorry for this. And we're going to fulfill this along with a small free gift or something. And I think you will be surprised how kind and good people are. They were like, we are
Mm.
so excited for your success and to be a part of that success, and we'll wait it out. Right. So I think building those relationships doesn't take long. It's just that you got to believe in it. I think that's so, so important for any business.
Man, that's so sweet. That's such a kind gesture from your end and a genuine gesture. And I think people really appreciate that. And I'm also being an investor here, putting my investor hat, the amount of insights that you gain from speaking to customers directly, I think that's a treasure trove that you're sitting on. All right. The last bit of this episode is what are you excited about for the future? The future of the world, the future of FireUp. What excites you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very, very exciting time for a company. I'm going to speak about the company first because,
Yes,
uh,
yes.
well, this is like a baby. Uh, it's one of those things you invest everything into, right? And some days you feel, what am I doing here? Like, why am I doing this? I'm not making any money off it in recent years. All my friends are making 200,000 or 300,000, 500,000 at high paying jobs. Is it worth it? Like that anticipation. And I think that belief, that trust in the process is the most exciting part of the day. I think I'm most excited about that. In terms of specifics, we're expanding to Australia this year. We hope to have a warehouse there. We're expanding into new product ranges. I think the most exciting thing is we are only the fourth cast iron brand in the world to be in Williams Sonoma in their collection. So I think that has been a dream. I've gone to the stores when I visited the US and I looked around and I was like, this is the Disneyland of homeware. And I was like, if any time in this life we could actually get a product here, that would be so exciting. So I think the director of Cookware directly talking to us and sort of picking up those products is so exciting. So I think I'm excited about that. Uh, but uh, generally in terms of how we are progressing, I think it's a cliched answer, but AI is so exciting. I do not need a lot of employees right now. Most of their work is being done by AI or by ChatGPT. Very, very regular stuff. So I think
Yeah.
that is that is that is something that is at least assisting the founders in an incredible way. I know so many people uh, who do not have to hire a lot of people, right? Because they can simply get all of this work done through AI.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. First of all, congratulations on the number of views on the article on Telegraph, you being sold
Thank you.
out. I'm so happy to hear that, Raghav. And that's what everyone wants, right? That's the proof of the meat that your products are great, that they're selling. And all the very, very best for your expansion. I hope more and more people buy this and you have more and more product categories that a lot more people can afford and a lot more people can experience what you bring to the table. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure, Jesse. I think, yeah, thank you very, very much. This was a very interesting conversation. I think it was talking to a VC is always exciting. So, yeah, thank you very much.